Some Blender modifiers are insanely powerful, and others are basically useless. So today I'm ranking from absolute S-tier monsters to the ones you should probably never touch. And trust me, some of these might surprise you. Just to be clear, I'm not going to go in depth on every single modifier, because there are a lot of them. I will briefly explain what they are and focus on how useful they actually are. And in the next video, we are putting those into combos, because some of these go from useless to actually really solid. So let's rank them. First up, I want to take a look at Array. Array is used to duplicate an object multiple times. In Blender 5.0, we actually have two array modifiers. One from previous version, which I already think deserve for S tier. But after seeing the new array, which significantly improves on the old one, I had to give it an S+ tier. The ability to create arrays along a curve around that circle or based on transformations is a huge time saver. Before, combining array with a curve modifier or setting up an empty on a circle was way too time consuming. Bevel is used to smooth and round the edges of an object by adding extra geometry. With Bevel, I kind of have a problem. When using it as a modifier, it feels like I have less control compared to just using Ctrl+B. But the advantage is that it stays procedural, so you can always adjust or remove it later. If you bevel directly in edit mode, it's basically permanent, so because of that trade-off, I'm putting bevel in B tier. Boolean is used to combine or cut objects using operations like union, difference, and intersection. This is basically essential for hard surface modeling. It's a tool you need to work efficiently with technical shapes. In my opinion, it deserves at least for S tier. With build, you can animate an object so it appears piece by piece over time. Despite that one use, it doesn't really impact the overall workflow much, so I consider it not very useful. I'm putting it in D tier. Curve to tube basically converts a curve into a 3D tube by giving it thickness. This function was already available directly in curve settings, so it feels more like a simplification and standardization of modifiers, rather than something new. Because of that, it doesn't change much for me. I would put it in C tier. Decimate reduced the number of polygons in a mesh, while trying to preserve its overall shape. This is a very important modifier, especially when you're working on models for 3D printing or optimizing sculpts. Because of that, I think Decimate deserves something like a B+ or even A tier. Edge split separates a mesh along edges based on an angle. It can be quite useful for splitting objects into parts, and I sometimes using it for creating abstract shapes like this one. That said, it doesn't have a huge impact on the overall workflow, but it's still a nice tool, so I'm putting it in B tier. Mask is used to hide or remove parts of a mesh, based on a vertex group or selection. I don't really use mask modifier myself, so if you have any cool use case, drop them in a comment. For me, it's D tier. Mirror is an essential tool when it comes to modeling symmetrical objects. It literally cuts your work in half, and if the object has multiple axes of symmetry, it can speed things up even more. On top of that, mirror works really well with subdivision, which I will talk about more in the next video about modifier combos. But even on its own, mirror easily deserves for S tier. Multiresolution adds multiple levels of details to a mesh, while preserving low-resolution geometry. This tool is mainly used for sculpting. It lets you keep your base mesh while also having a high-poly mesh for detailed sculpting. It's definitely a very solid tool, but for me it's an A tier. Remesh is a really interesting modifier with a few useful features. On one hand, you can take a messy mesh and turn it into clean quads for further work, especially for things like 3D printing. In other hand, with the blocks mode, you can create those Minecraft-style blocky objects. You also have options like sharp to preserve hard edges and smooth to soften them. It's especially useful for fixing mesh with a lot of non-manifold geometry or preparing models for 3D printing. Because of that, I think it deserves for A tier. Scatter on surface is a completely new tool introduced in the latest Blender 5.0+. In my opinion, it's one of the most interesting additions, because it lets you quickly distribute objects across the surface. It also comes with a lot of customization options like weight painting, scattering entire collections, and masking. For me, it's at least S tier. Screw is another underrated tool. It lets you create objects from a simple profile by spinning it around an axis, making things like screws, springs, or other circular shapes. Considering how quickly you can create round objects like vases, bottles, cups, plates, or bowls, this tool definitely deserves for S tier. Skin is used to generate a mesh around vertices and edges, creating a basic shape or structure that you can easily adjust. Honestly, I never really found a very useful use case for it, but recently I've started to change my mind, especially with how quickly you can generate an armature and, after assigning weights, get a rigged model in a few seconds. So from I originally thought it was a D tier, I'm moving it up to B tier. Solidify is a tool that adds thickness to flat geometry. With the latest 5.0 update, where it gained options like even thickness and only rim, it became even more powerful. Because of that, I think it moves up from A tier to a solid S tier. Subdivision Surface is definitely the king of modifiers. It's such a fundamental tool that an entire modeling style is named after it. It allows you to create smooth, high-quality surface from simple geometry, making it essential in almost any workflow. Definitely S+. Triangulate converts n-gon and quads into triangles, but personally I don't find it very useful in most cases, except for some specific situation, like combining it with Wireframe, which I will talk about in next video. Because of that, I would put it in C tier. Volume to mesh lets you convert a volumetric object back into a mesh. Honestly, I haven't really used it much before, but while preparing this video, once I understood how it works, it actually became really interesting. It feels like a great alternative for creating more abstract and organic shapes in a scene. When I started experimenting with it, I also realized that if you combine it with an interesting material and add some ambient occlusion, the result looks even better than I expected. Because of that, I think it deserves for A tier. Weld is used to merge nearby vertices together, cleaning up geometry and removing duplicates. But in my opinion, merge by distance just does this better. The only real advantage of Weld is that it's procedural and can be added for modifier stack. Because of that, I don't think I can put it any higher than C tier. Wireframe is a really underrated modifier. It lets you generate a mesh made entirely out of an object edges. And it can also be used to display topology by adding a slight offset and giving it a different material like black. As I mentioned earlier, it works really well in combination with modifiers like Subdivision Surface or Triangulate. The only issue I have with it is that it generates triangular elements and you can't really run them or change the profile, which is a bit limiting. Because of that, I am putting it in B tier. The Armature modifier isn't really used on its own. It's meant to bind a mesh to a rig. In that context, it's easily S tier, a must-have for animation. On its own, it doesn't really have a use. Cast is used to push a mesh into a specific shape like a sphere, cylinder or cuboid. A really nice feature is that you can limit it in specific axes, which makes it easy to round out shapes when needed. It's also great to fixing the pinching you often get on a UV sphere. Setting cast to 1 can remove it completely. Because of that, I can put it at least in B tier. With the curve modifier, you can deform an object along a chosen curve, letting it follow a specific path. It was also really useful with the old array setup, where you could make arrays follow a curve, which helped a lot in many workflows. Honestly, because of that and a bit of nostalgia, I would put curve in S+ tier. It saved me a lot of time, and it's even part of my Ornament Generator, which partially relies on this modifier. With the Displace modifier, you can add extra details to an object using either procedural textures or a height map. A really interesting feature is setting the coordinates to object, which lets you control the displacement by moving another object like an empty. Displacement deserves for at least A tier. Hook control and deform parts of a mesh using another object, like an empty. Honestly, I don't really find a complex or meaningful use for it, so I would put it in D tier. That changes a bit while you combine hook with Laplacian Deform, but I will talk about it in the next video. Laplacian Deform on its own is pretty much useless, but when you combine it with hook, It lets you deform parts of a mesh in a really controlled way. Because of that, I will give it a solid C tier. Mainly because I think Lattice is much better suited for this kind of deformations. With Lattice, you can deform an object using a separate Lattice object. It's perfect when you already have a finished model but want to make small adjustment to its shape. It gives you a lot of control and lets you smoothly transform parts of the mesh. I use it quite often, and for me it's definitely deserves for at least A tier. Mesh Deform works similarly to Lattice, with the difference that the deforming object doesn't have to be Lattice. It can be another mesh. I don't use it that often myself, but the use case are definitely there. So I would put it at least in A tier like Lattice. Shrinkwrap is used to project a mesh onto the surface of another object, making it conform to its shape. Shrinkwrap is the core tool for retopology, especially if you are doing it without any add-ons. Because of that, I can place it in a high A tier. Simple Deform is used to deform a mesh in basic ways like blending, twisting, tapering, or stretching it along an axis. In some cases it can be very useful, whether in animation or for general object manipulation. Because of that, I think it deserves A tier. Smooth helps relax and even out a mesh by smoothing its vertices and reducing sharp variations. We can also limit the smoothing based on angles. In my opinion, this modifier can be useful in some cases, but only rarely, so I am putting it in D tier. In theory, Corrective Smooth helps fix messy deformations, especially after things like rigging or other modifiers. But to be honest, I don't know how to use it, or I am too stupid for this modifier. For me, it's D tier. Laplacian Smooth works similarly to Corrective Smooth, but I have the same feelings about it as with other smoothing modifiers. For me, it's D tier. Surface Deform is kind of cool. It's used to bind one mesh to another, so it follows its surface deformation. I can imagine situations that this modifier can be useful. For me, it's B tier. Warp deforms a mesh between two objects, bending or stretching it based on their positions. It may be useful in some animation cases, that's why B tier. Wave can be used to create a wave-like deformations on a mesh, simulating ripples or moving surface effects. To be honest, I achieved some cool-looking wiggle animation. That's why for me it's strong B tier. Normal Edit allows you to change direction of normals to control how light interacts with a surface. Honestly, I'm not really sure what I would use this for, so I would put it in D tier, but if you have any good use case, let me know in the comments. Weighted Normal is used to adjust normals based on face area or angle, improving shading and making surface look smoother without using geometry. I think that's kind of cool. B tier. And finally we get to a real gem. It might seem simple, but it's actually one of the most important modifiers you will ever use. It's in pretty much every setup, and it lets you improve shading and make your geometry look clean and smooth. And I'm talking about smooth by angle. For me it's S+ tier. Cloth is used for simulating fabric and can be very useful. You've probably seen before how to make a flag simulation or quickly create a pillow. This can all be done using cloth simulation. In my opinion, in its application, it's a A tier. With collision, you can make objects interact with simulation like hair, cloth or soft bodies. But it doesn't work with rigid bodies. On its own, it doesn't really do anything, so I'm putting it in B tier. But when combined with other modifiers and simulations, it becomes much more interesting. And I will talk more about that in the modifier combination video. With dynamic paint, you can dynamically paint things like vertex weights, displacement, waves, or even textures directly onto a surface. Because of that, I think it's an S tier tool, especially in animation where it has a ton of use cases. Explode is used to break a mesh into pieces and animate them as if the object is exploding. Honestly, there are much better ways to create explosion effect, so this modifier feels pretty limited and not very useful. Because of that, I would put it at best in D tier. Fluid is used to simulate realistic liquid behavior, like water flowing, splashing, and interacting with objects. There are several alternatives for fluid simulation outside of Blender, and most people who focus on this kind of work tend to use those instead, even though they are paid. So while Blender Fluids does its job, it doesn't really stand out. Because of that, I'm putting it in B tier. Ocean Modifier is a quick way to create a realistic ocean waves. It procedurally generates water that you can animate. It's kind of useful, that's why for me it's B tier. Particle instance duplicates an object on the particles of another object's particle system. In the current meta of geometry nodes workflow, this is easily low D tier. It's simply useless. Particle system is used to generate particles. You can use it with hair to distribute objects across a surface or use it as an emitter for different effects. It offers a lot of customization options, but it's still not the same level as geometry nodes, so I'm putting it in A tier. Soft body is used to simulate soft, flexible objects that can bend, stretch or react to forces like gravity or collisions. In my opinion, it does exactly what it's supposed to do really well, so I'm putting it in A tier. I will cover the hair modifiers as a group. They are a set of tools for controlling hair and fur. It's a very useful addition, and for anyone working with hair, it's basically a must-have, so for me it's S tier. And if you want a deeper breakdown for hair modifiers, let me know in comments. Instance on Elements is a relatively new modifier, but it's quite useful. It lets you quickly place instances on points, edges and faces, or corners of the mesh. With just a few clicks you can generate complex geometry without much setup, and it also offers some customization options. Because of that, I think it deserves for at least A tier. Randomize Transform is a modifier that works the best with others, but it's definitely worth mentioning because it works with any instancing or generating setup. For example, you can add slide randomness to an array, and as long as you don't realize instances, the instances will stay randomized. It also works with other scattering setups, which makes it a really useful tool. Because of that, I would put it in A tier. Geometry node is, in my opinion, the most powerful tool, the one to rule them all. A lot of the newer modifiers are actually built on top of it. It's essentially a system that lets you create your own modifiers using nodes. So as an advanced user, you can build your custom tools and reuse them in your workflows. Because of that, Geometry node is easily S+++ tier. With data transfer, you can transfer data like weights, vertex colors, or vertex groups between objects. This makes it really useful when working with similar models, since you can quickly copy things like weights from one to another. It has a few solid use cases in real workflows, so I would put it in a solid B tier. Mesh cache is used to load and play back animation data from external cache files onto a mesh. If you have an MDD file ready, you can simply load it and give it your additional control over the animation through the interface settings. Personally, I don't really find much use for it, but I would be happy to hear your thoughts. For me, it's D tier. Mesh sequence cache does essentially the same thing, but for formats like Alembic, same as mesh cache D tier. UV project is used to project a texture onto a mesh from a camera or object. Personally, I prefer projecting texture using lights. I even made a tutorial about it, link in the description. Because of that, I think UV project only deserves for C tier. With UV warp, you can control the position of UV using an empty or another object. It's actually quite useful, for example when animating textures like tank tracks or similar effects. Because of that, I would put it in C tier. Vertex Weight Edit lets you globally adjust vertex weights across an object. It's a fairly useful option, C tier. Vertex Weight Mix lets you combine two weights maps using mathematical operation like add or multiply. It can be useful for things like scattering different objects, so I think it's deserved for at least B tier. Vertex Weight Proximity generates weights based on the distance between a mesh and another object. It's pretty useful, that's why for me it's also a B tier. And those are all the modifiers I've prepared for you. Let me know if you agree with my rankings or if you would place some of these differently. Also consider subscribing because next week I will be uploading a tier list of modifier combos. So definitely stick around for that. Thanks for watching and I will see you in the next one.